I smiled when she said it. I actually smiled. She was standing in my kitchen. My kitchen, the one I'd repainted 3 times over 30 years, the one where I'd made Sunday pot roast every week until my knees got bad, and she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You should start looking at senior living options. We need the space." I set down my coffee cup. I said, "Is that so?" She said it was. That was the morning everything changed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started, which was 3 years before that, when my son called me on a Tuesday night and asked if he and his wife could stay with me for a little while. My son is 41 years old. I have loved him since before he took his first breath, loved him through every mistake he made, every job he lost, every bad decision that seemed so obvious from the outside. He was my only child, born late in my marriage, and I raised him mostly on my own after my husband Raymond passed. Heart attack. Sudden 2009. My son was 17. We got through it together, the two of us, and I always believed that counted for something. When he called that Tuesday, he said his wife had left her job at the firm and they'd been burning through savings. He said it was temporary. He said 3 months, maybe 4. He said, "Mom, I wouldn't ask if we had any other option." I said yes. Of course I said yes. My house is a 3-bedroom colonial in a small town in Pennsylvania. I bought it in 1987 with Raymond, and I have lived in it for 36 years. My name is on the deed. My name alone, because Raymond and I refinanced after he passed and I handled everything myself. I want you to understand that. My name alone. They moved in on a Saturday in March. My son carried boxes while his wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law, because that's what she is, though the title has never quite sat right, directed him from the driveway. She did not carry a single box. She stood in my front yard pointing and occasionally checking her phone. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being sensitive. The first few weeks were fine. They were quiet. They cleaned up after themselves. My daughter-in-law was polite in the stiff way that people are polite when they're pretending. I made dinner a few nights a week. My son would come downstairs and eat with me, and we'd talk the way we used to talk, easy and honest. And for a little while it felt almost like when he was in high school, before everything got complicated. But then March became April. April became June. My daughter-in-law started leaving her things on the kitchen counter. Not just a spur or a phone charger, I mean everything. Her vitamins, her face creams, a whole row of supplements lined up like little soldiers along the backsplash I had specially tiled in 2004. One morning I went to make my coffee and found that she had rearranged the cabinet. My mugs were gone. She had moved them to a high shelf I couldn't reach without a step stool. I asked her about it. Gently, I said, "Oh, where did the mugs go?" She said the cabinet looked cluttered and she'd organized it. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I got the step stool. I got my mug. I didn't say anything else. That was my first mistake, I think. Not saying anything else. By fall of that year, 3 months had become 8. My son got a new job, not a great one, but steady. And I thought, okay, now they'll start looking for a place. Instead, my daughter-in-law started making comments about the house. The carpeting was old. The bathroom tile was dated. The backyard needed landscaping. She said all of this in that particular tone women use was when they're not quite criticizing, but they want you to know they're not quite not criticizing. I let it go. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself she didn't mean it the way it sounded. My neighbor Patrice, she's been across the street from me for 20 years, one of the realest women I've ever known. Patrice pulled me aside one afternoon when I was checking the mail and said, "How long are those two staying?" I said I wasn't sure. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "You need to be careful." I said, "It's my son." She said, "I know who it is." The second year, my daughter-in-law got a new job, a good one, remote, with a company out of Atlanta. My son was promoted. They were doing well. Better than well, honestly. I could see it in the things they bought, the packages arriving daily, the new laptops and the standing desk she had delivered to the second bedroom, which had been my sewing room for 15 years. I'd moved my sewing machine to the basement without being asked. She hadn't asked. She'd just mentioned casually that she was going to need a quiet workspace, and somehow I'd understood that meant my room. I moved my sewing machine to the basement. I know how that sounds. I know. But he was my son, and I kept thinking, any day now. Any day they'll find a place. I didn't want to be the mother who made her son's marriage harder. I didn't want to be the source of conflict. I had watched Raymond's mother do that, create friction just to feel powerful, and I had always told myself I would never be that woman. So I stayed quiet. I made space. I gave up the room. The third year was when things turned sharp. It was small things at first. My daughter-in-law stopped greeting me in the mornings. Not rudely, she would walk into the kitchen, pour her coffee, check her phone, and leave without making eye contact. I started to feel like a ghost in my own house. I'd come downstairs and they'd be watching something on the big TV in the living room, something they'd clearly been watching for a while, and there was never an invitation to sit down, never a "hey, come watch with us," just a kind of stillness that said, "This is our space now." My son started seeming uncomfortable when I came into rooms. Not angry, not mean, just uncomfortable. Like I was a complication. That was the word that came to me one night when I couldn't sleep. Complication. I had become a complication in my own home. I told Patrice about the sewing room. I told her about the mugs, the counter, the mornings. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. And when I was done, she said, "What does your son say?" I said I hadn't talked to him directly. She said, "Talk to your son." I tried. I really did. I caught him one evening when his wife was on a call upstairs, and I said, "I want to check in with you. I feel like things have shifted a little, and I want to make sure we're okay." He said, "Mom, of course we're okay. Why wouldn't we be okay?" He said it the way you say something when you don't want to have the conversation that's actually needed. I recognized it. I'd said it myself a few times, over the years. I let it go. Here is what I have not told you yet. About 2 years into their stay, I had started buying lottery tickets. I know that sounds like the detail that shouldn't matter, but it matters. Let me explain. I had always bought tickets occasionally, a scratch-off here, a Powerball slip there, the way a lot of people my age do, more for the ritual of hoping than any real expectation. But something about having 2 people essentially living my life in my house made me want something that was entirely mine. Something small, something weekly, something nobody knew about. So every Thursday I drove to the Sunoco on Route 9, bought a Mega Millions ticket, and tucked it in the small zippered pocket of my everyday purse. I never told anyone, not even Patrice. I did this for 2 years, every Thursday. It was a Thursday morning in October when my daughter-in-law came downstairs and told me we needed to talk. My son was at work. It was just the 2 of us in the kitchen. And she sat down across from me with her coffee and her phone on the table, and a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Decided. That's the word. She looked decided. She said that she and my son had been thinking, and they felt the time had come to make some changes. She said they loved me and they wanted what was best for everyone. She said they had been doing some research and had found a very nice senior living community about 40 minutes away that had openings. I said, "I'm 67 years old." She said age wasn't really the point. She said the house was big and the upkeep was a lot for one person and they could help me with the transition. They'd even cover the first 3 months of fees. I want you to understand. They had not won any money at this point. They had 2 incomes and they were doing okay, but there was no windfall, no sudden wealth. She simply had decided on her own that she was ready for me to leave my house. I said very calmly, and I am proud of this. I am genuinely proud. I said, "Whose name is on the deed to this house?" She said that wasn't the point. I said, "I think it's exactly the point." She pushed back from the table. She said I was being difficult. She said they had put 3 years into this house. I said what they had put into this house was 3 years of free rent. She said that was an ugly way to look at it. I said, "I agree. I think the whole situation has gotten ugly. But I'm not going anywhere." She went upstairs. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Patrice. Patrice came over that afternoon, and we sat on the back porch, and I told her everything. She didn't say, "I told you so." She's too good for that. She said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know yet. I went upstairs that evening to get a sweater from my closet, and when I passed the second bedroom, my old sewing room, I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. I was in the hallway for maybe 10 seconds. But I heard her say, "She won't just leave. We might have to push harder. We might have to push harder." I stood very still. Then I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought, clearly, for the first time in 3 years, I have let this go on long enough. The next morning, I called an attorney. His name is not important. What is important is that he confirmed what I already knew. The house was mine. I owed them nothing, and they had no legal standing to remove me from my own property. He said if they refused to leave, that would be a different situation. He said I should document things going forward. I started documenting dates, conversations, the comment about pushing harder. I kept a small notebook in my purse, next to the zippered pocket where I kept my Thursday tickets. My son came home that evening and he was quiet at dinner. We still had dinner together sometimes, out of habit more than anything. After his wife went upstairs, he said, "Mom, I want you to know this wasn't my idea." I looked at him, my 41-year-old son who I had loved for 4 decades without condition. I said, "Then whose idea was it?" He looked at his hands. I said, "I need you to understand something. This is my home. I am not leaving. And if the two of you would like to stay, we need to have a real conversation about what that looks like going forward." He nodded. He said, "Okay." He didn't look at me, but he said, "Okay." 2 weeks after that conversation, my son came home from work early. I heard the front door open at 2 in the afternoon, and I thought something was wrong. He came into the kitchen and he was shaking, actually shaking. I stood up. He said, "Mom, sit down." I sat down. He put his phone on the table. He showed me the lottery website. He had checked the numbers. He bought tickets sometimes, too. I'd known that. And one of his numbers had come up. He thought. He wasn't sure. He said he needed to check the ticket. He went upstairs. I heard him and his wife talking, heard her voice go high, heard what sounded like crying, good crying, shocked crying. They came downstairs together and she was holding a ticket in both hands like it might crumble. They had won $2 million. I want to be honest, for a moment, just a moment, I felt happy for them. I thought, this is it. This is what gets them out. They'll buy a house, they'll start their lives, we'll all be okay. That feeling lasted about 90 seconds. My daughter-in-law set the ticket on the kitchen table and looked at me and said, "I think you know what this means." I said, "What does it mean?" She said they were going to renovate the house, start with the kitchen. She said the tile was 30 years old and the layout wasn't functional, and they wanted to open up the wall between the kitchen and the living room. I said, "This house." She said, "Yes." I said, "My house." She said, "And I want to get this exactly right, because I have repeated it to myself many times since." She said, "I don't think that framing is helpful anymore. We've built a life here. We've invested in this space. Things are different now." I looked at her. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. I said, "May I see the ticket?" She handed it to me. I looked at the ticket for a long moment. Then I reached into my purse, into the small zippered pocket. I placed my own ticket on the table. Here is what had happened. And I know this sounds improbable, but I need you to understand that the lottery is improbable by definition. The week before, I had checked my usual numbers against the Mega Millions drawing, and I hadn't matched enough to matter. I had put the ticket in my purse like always and forgotten about it. I am a creature of habit, and my habit is to keep the old ticket in my purse until I buy the new one on Thursday. When my son put his phone on the table and showed me the website, I looked at the numbers, and then something shifted in my chest. I recognized those numbers. Not from his ticket, from mine. We had, by some collision of fate and coincidence, picked the same numbers. Not exactly the same. He had used a quick pick, which randomized 2 of the positions. I had used the same numbers I always used. Raymond's birthday, our anniversary, the year I bought the house. My ticket had an additional matching number, 1 number more than his. His ticket was worth $2 million. I knew that from the website. Mine was worth more. I didn't know how much more until later. Until I went back to the Sunoco and they scanned it, and the clerk's face changed, and she called her manager. It took several days and a great deal of paperwork, but the answer was $2 million for my son, and $4,200,000 for me. Receipt. My name. Purchased by me. Not a gift. Not a joint entry. Mine. I sat across from my daughter-in-law at my kitchen table and I told her all of this as calmly as I could manage. She said that was impossible. I said, and yet. She said, you're lying. I said, I have the receipt. I have the ticket. I have the store's security footage of me purchasing it last Thursday. Would you like me to get those? She didn't say anything. My son looked up from the table for the first time. He looked at me, and then he looked at his wife, and something moved across his face that I hadn't seen in a long time. Something like recognition. I gave them 30 days. I want to be clear, I did not throw them out. I did not make a scene. I sat with my attorney, and I wrote them a formal and polite letter explaining that I would need the house to myself by the end of the following month, and that I expected them to begin making arrangements. I included information about rental markets in 3 nearby towns. I wished them well. My son called me the next morning. He said, Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know when things got like this. I don't know how I let that happen. I said, I know you don't. I said, I want you in my life. I love you. But I need you to understand that this house is mine, and what happened here wasn't acceptable, and I need you to see that clearly. He said he did. I believed him, partially. They moved into a rental apartment in a town 20 minutes away at the end of the following month. He called me the day after the move. She did not call. Patrice came over the evening after they left, and we sat on the back porch with 2 glasses of iced tea and didn't talk much. We watched the yard. The leaves were starting to turn. It was October again, almost exactly a year after my daughter-in-law had sat across from me with her coffee and her decided look. Patrice said, What are you going to do with the money? I said I was going to get the kitchen re-tiled first, the tile I wanted. The color I chose in 1994 that Raymond had said was too bold. She laughed. She said, and after that, I thought about it. I said, I'm going to get my sewing machine back up from the basement. That was 9 months ago. My sewing machine is back in the 2nd bedroom. I have been to Ireland twice, and I have a trip to Portugal planned for the spring. My son and I have dinner about once a month, just the 2 of us, and it is careful but real, and I think it will get easier over time. I moved my mugs back to the low cabinet. I still buy a ticket every Thursday. I don't expect to win again, but I go to the Sunoco. I choose my numbers. Raymond's birthday, our anniversary, the year I bought the house, and I tuck the ticket in the small zippered pocket of my purse. Some things are just mine, and that is enough.